Okay, so I'll share my screen and we can get started. Okay, and everyone can see my screen and hear me all right? Cool. So today we're going to be learning about hooks and stuff in React. And um, so far we've learned about one hook. Um, I usually have an agenda slide. I forgot to make one for this, but we're just going to get right into it. We're going to start by talking about hooks. So functions in React that start with the word use are called hooks. So we've already been using one called useState. This is how we create state variables in React. And if you remember, you use useState, you get a variable and a function for setting that variable. So you get like to do and then set to do. So that's useState. It's a function given to you by React that allows you to create state, and the state is registered with React so that the DOM will re-render whenever those variables change. And that's one of the key benefits of React, is that you don't have to worry about updating the DOM based on your variables. React does it for you as long as you use useState. There's other hooks too. One of them is called useEffect. There's another one called useContext, and there's even a few others. Today, we're going to be learning about useEffect. And it's a little bit confusing in a way, but I'll see if I can hopefully explain it in a way that makes sense. So hooks let you use different React features from your components. So React has a bunch of built-in stuff going on behind the scenes, and you can kind of hook into that stuff using their functions. We just call them hooks, but it's basically just a function that allows you to interact with React in some way. You can either use built-in hooks or combine them to build your own. So today we're going to be talking about building custom hooks. So the kind of basic idea, and I haven't really heard this talked about. I just kind of looked it up. Why are they called hooks? Well, they let you hook into the internal processes of React. That's kind of how you can think of it. So you have your code here, and then React is doing its own thing. React is like this kind of complicated system that's kind of running, it's doing its own thing. And when you want your app to be able to use some sort of thing that's available in React, it's kind of like your app is hooking into the React system. And you can think of it as kind of React has like a render cycle. So your components are mounting and unmounting, and your DOM is rendering and re-rendering, and all that like stuff that React is doing for you. You can control it using hooks. So ultimately, they're just normal JavaScript functions, and that's really it. So useState is a hook, and we've seen this before. This is how you create a new state variable, and then you get the setter for that state variable. So message set message equals useState, and then you pass in the default value, the initial value. So if you want your message to start out as hi, this is what you do. And then anytime you want to change your message, you use this setter function here. The syntax is weird. I've explained it a couple times, but it uses array destructuring. So useState returns an array with two things. And then here you're receiving those two things. And you could store the actual result in its own variable and then pull out these two things, but this is the easier way of doing it. So that's the syntax. Looks a little weird, but hopefully you're getting comfortable with that at this point. Um, oh, I have an image that's not showing. I might try reloading this and see if that works. Okay, that worked. Cool. Okay, so useEffect is another hook, and we're going to be talking about it today. But first, we have to talk about what an effect is. So useState makes sense. The state is the thing that you're getting back from this useState hook. So useEffect, it has something to do with an effect. And so before we talk about useEffect, I'm just going to explain what an effect is in programming. So what it really is talking about is a side effect. So let's talk about what a side effect is. Side effects are concepts from functional programming. So you might have heard of object-oriented programming, which uses objects and classes, and you kind of it's kind of it's like a design pattern for code. So it's a way of grouping your variables and your functions together into an object or a class. That's object-oriented programming. Functional programming is a different programming paradigm that focuses on functions. And it's kind of the way that React works. React, there's kind of the old way of React was actually more object-oriented, but they made functional components, and now the new way of using React that's pretty standard is using functional components, which borrows from functional programming, that paradigm. And one concept in functional programming is side effects. So a function is said to have side effects if it uses external variables and or mutates its parameters. So any function, if it's kind of just in general, if it's interacting with any variables or data that comes from outside the function itself, not from parameters, then it's said to have side effects. You could kind of think of it as um, like a drug that you take, like a prescription drug. It might have side effects. The side effects are kind of unintended things that might happen. And in functional programming, your function might have different consequences that aren't kind of the main purpose of the function. And so those are side effects. And it's a little bit nuanced. There's some like specific details, but the basic idea of side effects is your function is altering something or receiving data from something that isn't directly in the scope of the function. So basically a side effect is when a function affects or is affected by anything outside of its scope. A function with no side effects is called a pure function, and a function with side effects is called an impure function. So functions can either be pure or impure, and it has to do with whether it has side effects or not. So pure or impure. Pure functions have no side effects, and they always return the same value given the same input and don't mutate external variables or parameters. That's kind of a more formal definition of them. So there's certain qualities that a pure function has to have in order to be considered pure. And the basic idea is it returns the same value given the same input. So if you input the same parameters to your function, it doesn't matter how many times you run that function, it should always return the same value. And it shouldn't affect anything else. It shouldn't touch any other state. It shouldn't interact with any other state. So it's kind of like it's like a self-contained, isolated system. So this would be an example of a pure function. I have a function called add, and it just adds your two parameters, num1 and num2, and returns a result. So we call add, we pass in 1 and 2, And no matter what, this function will always return 3 if we pass in 1 and 2 as the parameters. So judging just based on this line where we call the function and pass in the parameters, we don't care what actually goes on in the function. We know that the result will always be 3 and it won't affect anything else in our app. There's no like unintended consequences or like details that you need to know about it. And then an impure function has side effects, and so it may return different values given the same input, and it may mutate external variables or parameters. So here we have an example of an impure function. This is the add function again, but now we have this external variable here. And the add function is now returning our 2 parameters, num1 and num2, and the external variable. It's returning the sum of all 3 of these things, and our external variable is added to that. So we can pass in 1 and 2, and the parameters themselves aren't the only detail we need to know about this. We need to know what this external variable is, because the result we get depends on the external variable. So whatever this variable is, will change what we get. So the basic idea is that this is not the whole story. Adding 1 and 2, there's some external thing that affects this function that isn't related to the parameters. Okay. So that's kind of the basic idea. It's not a thing specific to React, but useEffect is a React thing that is talking about side effects. It's in relation to side effects. So useEffect is another React hook. And the idea of it is, remember, a side effect is a function, or it's a quality of a function that interacts with some external data. Or that's one version of a side effect. So useEffect allows you to interact with external systems in React. So external systems include databases, servers, local storage, and other things. This lesson today, we're going to be talking about local storage. Local storage, I do have some slides talking about it. It's basically just a database that's in your web browser. So interacting with data from elsewhere is a side effect. And in React, we have each component is a function. And because each component is a function, if that component interacts with some external data, then it's an impure function. It's a function with side effects. Because otherwise, we can expect if we pass in the same parameters to our function or our component, in the case of React, we would be using props as parameters basically to our React components, which are functions. If we pass in the same props to a React component, we would expect the React component to return the same JSX every single time. But useEffect will actually mean this component is dependent on some external system, whether that's a database or the internet, like a server or whatever. So useEffect allows you to basically interact with some external system. And here's just a diagram. So React, you have your database or server, and then useEffect allows you to interact with them, whether that's getting data from your database or sending data to a database. And the syntax can be kind of confusing, unfortunately, but I'll try to make it easy here. So when you call useEffect, it takes 2 parameters. The first parameter is a function, and the second parameter is an array. So we're going to first talk about the function that you pass in. So If actually, I'll pause really quick. Um, does anyone remember what you call a function that you pass into another function?
Is that a callback function?
Yep, exactly. Yep. So this is a callback function here. And the idea of a callback function is this function, useEffect, is going to be responsible for calling our function. So we don't call our function, useEffect calls our function, and it determines when to call it. And because React is complicated with its component render cycle, this useEffect ensures that our function is called at specific points in the render cycle when we need it to. So we don't want to just call directly to our database from inside a component. And the main reason is our components are going to rerun over and over when the state of them changes. If you remember, when you change your state, then your component reloads and all the code inside your component will run again over and over. And useEffect kind of pulls us out of that render loop and ensures that we don't call back to our database every single time our component changes. Every time our component loads, it won't call back to our database. It only calls back to our database under specific circumstances. And the second parameter, the array, is what determines when this function is called. So in the function, you'll write some code that interacts with an external system. And here it looks a little bit different from the last frame. Really, all I did is I extended the body of this function to be multiple lines. So this curly brace here and closing right there, I just extended it over multiple lines. So the body of this arrow function is multiple lines. It's still the same as this, though. I just put my cursor in between these curly braces and pressed enter a couple times and then put a comment right there. So it's a little weird looking because, again, this is one function that we're calling called useEffect. This inside is a callback function that we have, and then we still have a comma and then the second parameter. So the second parameter is all the way down here. It looks kind of confusing, but that's just the way it is. So now we're going to talk about the array. So for now, I'm just going to leave the function like this, and I'm just going to say we're going to get here to where we're actually like interacting with the database in this function. For right now, all you need to know is that in this function, we're going to be interacting with the database in this callback function. The array here is called a dependency array. And it basically defines when this function will run. So the dependency array, it's called a dependency array because it's dependent on some state. So it needs a list of the state variables which are being used in the callback function, the first parameter. So any state that we're using, either state that we're syncing with the database or, well, yeah, either we're sending our React state to the database or we're retrieving React state from a database. Either way, if we want our React state to be synced up with whatever's in a database, then we need to put the state variables in this array here. So any state that is sent or retrieved from the external system needs to be put into the array by you. So you will actually put some variables in that array right there. And again, I keep on saying database or external system. useEffect, the most typical use for it is interacting with a server or database. There's other things you can do with it, but those are just the most common uses for it. So that's what yeah, I'm being specific because I think it helps in this case to just think about it as you're interacting with a database. So we have to put state inside this array here. And so that's what we just did. I put our to-dos state inside this array, and then you also have to put the setter inside the array if you're using the setter inside this function. So the setter also counts as something that's a dependency in this array. So the idea is basically this useEffect will run our function that interacts with the database whenever our to-dos changes. So anything in this dependency array, any of this state, whenever this state changes, then our function will rerun. And the key part of that is if we change our to-dos and we want our database to be synced up with our to-dos to get the latest updates, it would be nice if whenever our to-dos changes, like we add a new to-do, it would be nice if this useEffect synced it up with our database, if it made calls to the database. And so that's what this dependency array does, is it says any variables you put in here, any state you put in here, whenever those change, it will call this function again. And it will send requests and receive responses from our external system. So that's the point of the dependency array. It says whenever these variables change, that's when we're going to run this function. The setter has to go in there too. The setter is not going to change. Your setter is never going to change, but React will complain if your setter isn't in there. Or ESLint will complain, your linter. It doesn't really matter. All you need to know is really putting your state in here that is used in this function. And then there's another detail, which I didn't make a separate slide for, but one detail is you can leave this dependency array empty and it will call this function when the component loads and then never again. So if you want to sync to the database, but then never again, you just do it right when the component loads, you can leave this dependency array empty, and that's kind of what that translates to. When you leave the dependency array empty, it says, it basically tells React, run this function once and never again. And there's specific use cases for that when you'd want to run some state when the component mounts, is what it's called. So the component mounts, you run some code. If the dependency array is empty, then it will only run that code when the component first mounts, and then every re-render of the component, it will not run this function. And that's actually like the secret to running code only on the first render of a component. So if you have a component that will be re-rendered over and over because the state of it is changing, if you want some code in that component that only runs when the component initially loads on the first render, then you can put a useEffect with an empty dependency array, and it will run some code once and only once for that component. Okay. Yeah, lots of like weird stuff going on here. I know, but we're gonna when we start writing some code, hopefully you'll see it in action, and that might help. It's just confusing. This is one of the most confusing things about React is useEffect, and so don't worry if it's confusing you. It confuses everyone. Okay, so the purpose of the dependency array is to determine when the function will run. It will run whenever the value of the dependency array changes. So whenever this state changes, the function will run. This ensures your external system gets the updated version of your state when you change it locally. There's still more to learn about it, but that's enough to get started. There's some stuff about if you want to, there's like a cleanup function you can run. So if you have a return, I won't even talk about it. It rarely comes into play. You don't need to know about it. There's more details, but for now, this is like more than enough to get started. Okay. So now we're going to talk about custom hooks. So far we've seen useState and useEffect. Those are two hooks that are provided to you by React that allow you to do specific things inside React, mainly managing state or syncing with external systems. Custom hooks, you can make your own hooks. It sounds like it might be complicated. It's really pretty simple though. It allows you to basically pull, well, I'll I'll get to it. So normal JavaScript functions outside of components can't use hooks, and custom hooks solve that problem. So if you were to try to use state in a JavaScript function that wasn't in a component, you would get an error. You can't use any hooks, or you can't like meaningfully use React state usually in a normal JavaScript function that's outside of a component. So you really only are using these hooks inside components up until this point. But a custom hook is just like a normal JavaScript function, except they allow you to work with React stuff like state hooks, and it's aware of the render cycle. So basically, React is re-rendering your components. It's changing the DOM. It's doing all this complicated stuff behind the scenes. And custom hooks are like functions that are aware of all that stuff, and they work within React's framework. So you can think of it like a function. And it is a function, actually. So here, this is kind of close to the end result of the code that we're going to write today. This is almost the full thing that we're going to make. We have our component with to-dos and set to-dos. And instead of saying use state, we're using a custom hook called use to-dos. Our custom hook, use to-dos, is right here. It's this function. And it's basically a normal JavaScript function, except it has to start with the word use. So you make your own function and you have to start it with use. And then you can have React hooks inside this function. And so here I'm creating state using use state or to-do state. This I just copied over from our component. I copied over this line. And I actually copied over all these lines pretty much, except for the return. So the use effect here too, I also used to have in my component, but I copied it over into a hook, a custom hook. So the custom hook basically allows you to encapsulate your complex state and hooks, pull it out of your component and put it into its own function. So now this hook is creating our to-do state, ensuring that it's synced up with a database, and then returning an array with to-dos and set to-dos. Because it's returning an array, we can actually destructure that array right here. And the syntax is exactly the same as use state. So in case you were curious, that's how use state is doing it behind the scenes. Use state returns an array with two things inside of it. And so that's what we're doing here. And then we destructure them out. And now in our component, we're using to-dos in the same way as if we had it from use state, except this hook is the thing that's, oh, sorry, one sec. Sorry, roommate wanted me. Okay, so the custom hook is a way of basically it manages all of your specific state stuff without having it be in your component. So yeah. Okay, one last topic for this lecture, and then I'll get to actual coding, is local storage. So local storage is a database that's built into your browser, your web browser. It's not a React thing. Yeah, so local storage is a database built in your browser. It's not a or it's a JavaScript thing. It's not a React thing. So you can use it in React because React is JavaScript, but you can use it in any JavaScript app. It's just it's a database that's built into your browser, and you can access it using your dev tools. So if you open your dev tools and you go to the application menu, and then you go to storage, local storage, and then you go to the URL that your app is being ran on, you can see a database and this specific database, there's different types of databases. This one is a key value database. So you have, just like in an object in JavaScript, you have a key and a value. So you can have a list of keys and values. And that's how you store data in local storage. So you store it in key value pairs. So we're going to be using that today to store your list of to-dos. The end. Oh, also just like the purpose of using this really quick is you can reload your page and it will keep your to-dos. So up until this point, whenever you reload your page, it deletes all of your to-dos. Storing them in the local storage will keep them around even when you reload your tab. Okay. So I'll pause there and about to get into some coding, but first I'll just pause and make sure I address any questions. How's everyone feeling? Anything you need clarifying on or anything like that?
Yeah, that review was definitely helpful. Use state was a little bit confusing. I mean, not use
Good.
state, it's the fact.
useEffect. Yeah, I'm glad. Okay, looks like I got some stuff in the chat. Anton says, so this is a decorator. At least it looks like a decorator.
It was for a custom hooks.
Custom hooks.
That slide with an example of custom hook.
Yeah. Yeah, custom hooks are not a decorator.
This one, yeah,
concept. Yeah. There's actually there's no concept of a decorator in just React or JavaScript, really. There is in TypeScript though, and Python.
Like I mean that decorator pattern in general, because like what we are doing here, we
Yeah,
are
like adding
grabbing
some
that
functionality that
like simple use state and decorate it with additional logic. In our case, it's just retrieving data from database. So what we are doing here is just decorating base logic with additional one. That's why it looks like a decorator for me.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. I see that logic. I'm not, I am not fully sure. I haven't used decorators that much, so I can't talk to that really, but yeah, I do. From my understanding, it's similar in a way because it's adding some functionality to something. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Just curious, will there be an error if I do not use the word use when naming a custom hook? I think so. It might. Okay. Yeah, for the sake of convention, I'd use. Yeah, I'm not sure if it'll error out. I could try it. What's a decorator? Yeah, decorator. Do you want to try describing it, Anton?
No, I just answering questions in chat.
Okay.
So like, it was like about decorator because someone is not familiar with design patterns, and it's totally okay.
Yeah.
Like
It's a thing
maybe
you'll
that's
see
why it
in
was like
other
my
programming
question was a
languages.
little bit confusing.
Yeah. Yeah, you'll see decorators in Python and I think in Java and
Like in all languages, you can do decorator like everywhere.
Yeah.
It doesn't like you can go for even not object-oriented languages like Scala or Golang and use decorator there. So it's like that design patterns are not stick to like exact language or framework. It's just as a whole, it's an approach how you can like handle or wrap your code to do like usual things in more convenient way.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I don't know enough about decorators to confidently talk about it. I feel like I would just confuse people. But
It's like more like computer science maybe thing, not like React
yeah.
specific, but it just looked as a decorator for me. That's why I asked just to more clearly understand this approach with custom.
If I'm not mistaken, you mean the decorator means like just refactor the code, right? Uh, I'm trying to explain if I'm not mistaken, the custom hook is in the example in the presentation, it shows related to the list, but normally custom hook is a generic. So you can do it later for to-do list and you can do it more other things too, like a class inheritation. Like I don't I don't want to confuse you, but so it is a generic thing. Am I right, Rio? Not for to-do
like
list only.
it shouldn't take in parameters or configuration
Yeah,
or
for
something.
example, the parameter is like a key and value instead of to-do list or just generic arrays, and then we can use it in the app for to-do list, and we can use it in the app for all others requirement or all others use effects if we need.
Yeah.
So in the example, it shows just the field with to-do list. That's why maybe it's a little bit confusing. Why did we do this? So we just, put the use effect and use state in the thing. And probably Anton means it is just a decoration, and that's why.
Yeah.
Yeah, like what the exact use case, what is the reason to use custom hooks? To add like some specific to this case functionality to like standard hooks, yeah? So we use custom hooks to add additional functionality. So like additional extra behavior to the standard command functionality. And this is the definition of decorator pattern, to add additional behavior to an object or like to a function, whatever, just to like to add that functionality without breaking anything. It's a definition of decorator pattern. So like that's why for me it looks like it.
Yeah, from my understanding, a custom hook you're not modifying an existing thing. So a decorator would be adding functionality to an existing class or function or something. You're just tacking something onto an existing thing. Whereas in a custom hook, you're defining a new function that has some, logic encapsulated in it. It's more like just a standard function. That's how I think of it. Because it
So it's
encapsulates logic.
we can use that, but cannot use that. It's just a wrapper over like some functionality.
Yep.
Yes, yeah.
It's just a
Okay,
reusable
okay.
set of React hooks, like a
Then it's
function.
probably not 100% the same as decorator, but like similar, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate you like pulling that insight though. It's always good to like, be making connections in your head, and like I think it is a good thing to, be drawing parallels, and got me thinking about decorators again. I'll have to
Yeah,
do
of
more
course,
reading about them.
and it helps me as well, just to clarify that in my mind.
Yeah.
It's like
good.
my way of like addressing new features in my mind is just to compare them with something that's I'm familiar with like from my previous experience.
For sure. Okay, well, I wanna I don't want to spend too much more time on this. I want to get to writing some code. So, all right, I'm gonna screen share if everyone's ready. And again, like feel free to continue asking questions, but gonna get to the code writing. Okay.
All right.
Okay, am I screen sharing yet?
I can see your
Yes,
screen.
Okay.
You see your
Okay, cool. Okay, I already wrote the code for this lesson and I need to go back and get this is the finished version. I need to go back. So I'm going to do git log one line and it's going to show a history of my commits. This is not stuff that you need to be worrying about. This is just I'm showing you my process because I did the work for this lesson to practice before the lesson, and now I'm trying to go back. So I'm going to go back to this commit. I'm going to copy that commit hash because this is branch lesson 1.4 where we left off on. So I'm going to say git checkout and then paste that commit hash, and it will take me back to that point in time. So this should be where we left off on last time. And I'm going to start my app. Looks like it was already started, but I can go to this. I have two terminals. One is for running the app and the other is for doing git commands and stuff. So npm run dev. That will run my app. I'm going to copy that URL, go here, paste it. It's already there. Okay, so this is my app. I'm doing geese instead of to-dos because I don't want my code to be easily copied. But wherever you see goose, just replace it with to-do. I'm going to resize these. Okay. So let's get started. Let's pull up these requirements for the lesson today. So, okay. So the first step is saving our to-do list in local storage. And if you remember, local storage is the database that is in your browser. And it'll allow us to reload our page and not lose our to-dos. And we're going to have to use useEffect to interact with that external system, right? So I'm going to open my source app.js and I can zoom in. Okay, open source app.jsx, define a useEffect React hook with to-do list as a dependency. Okay. So I'm in my app.jsx and I'm going to make a useEffect here. useEffect. And then I need to import it. So the way I import it is I pull up this suggestions list and I just click on the top one and it will import it for me. Otherwise, you can write out the import. So import useEffect and useState from React like that. So now we have access to the useEffect function. And if you remember, useEffect takes in an arrow function or just any function. I like arrow functions for this. And a array, which is the dependency array. And anything in this function that we do, so we can talk to external systems. Talk to external systems inside this function, and here I'll zoom in a bit. And then in this dependency array, this is where I'm going to put any state that's involved with the external system. So let's go back. Okay, so we created a useEffect with, we need to put to-do list as a dependency. So in our dependency array, I'm going to put goose list. Because our goose list is going to be the state that is going to sync to our browser, to our local storage. Okay. And it could be that we don't need to put set goose list in here too. Like in my slides, I said if you're putting a state variable, you need to also put the setter for it. It could be that you don't have to. I mean, when I learned React, I learned that. But if it's possible that the build system, Vite, or the linter, ESLint, are different because it's been a couple years. But for now, let's assume that the homework is telling you the right thing. So only putting the goose list in there, that should be fine. Okay, so inside the side effect handler function, the callback, save the to-do list inside local storage with a key of saved to-do list. Hint, use localStorage.setItem. Okay, so they just throw you in the deep end asking you to use useEffect and local storage already. I guess they're assuming here that you have read up on how to use these things, which luckily we have at this point. So let's do local storage. I think it's a capital S. Local storage dot set item. And this is how you save a new entry in this browser database. And it says the key should be saved to-do list, and the value is going to be to-do list. So I'm going to set item save to-do list is the first parameter. So you have the first parameter is the key, and then the second parameter should be the value. So the value is going to be, oh, actually I have to-do list here. I'm actually going to put goose list. So saved goose list and then goose list. So in local storage, we're setting a new item in our local storage database. The key is saved goose list, and the value is the value of our goose list. Okay, run your application and view it in the browser, enter a new to-do, open your local storage, and verify that saved to-do list exists. Note the value is not readable. Okay, so I'll go to my browser. I'll open up my DevTools and go to application here. On the side here, there's storage, and we go to local storage, open that up like that, and then click on this. This is the URL that our app is being served on, localhost 5173. So there probably will only be one thing in here, but that is your app. And we can see here, we have a key value store. The first entry is to do, learn React. This is actually something I manually entered earlier. And it's still there because it saves between page reloads. So I can reload the page. I'm hitting reload and it's still there. So this is something I added earlier. You can actually just manually change these too. So I think I can delete. Yeah. Okay, so we have saved goose list with a value of nothing. I don't know if that's, yeah, I think that's right. Let me try deleting it and then I'll refresh. Yeah. So save goose list value is nothing. Yeah. Notice that the value is not readable. If you had existing to-dos, then the value will look strange. It'll look like object, which is something that we're going to address here. Actually, how about I forgot, I need to add a to-do. So I'm gonna add a goose. Jan, which is the name of my grandma. Okay. So we have Jan here, and now Jan, the goose, is in our local storage. The value is object, which that's very strange looking. What does that mean? Shouldn't the value be Jan? Well, the problem here is it's trying to show an array of objects, but we haven't, the local storage can't turn it into a string on its own. And that's what happens when you have objects that try to get printed out. They sometimes look like that, and we need to store it as a string. So we need to convert the to-do list to a string before saving in local storage, and we can use the json.stringify method. So any values in this database here should be stored as a string. And so how do you turn an array or an array of objects into a string? You can do that using json.stringify, which is kind of strange, but we're going to say const, I'll say goose list string equals goose list. And then I'm going to stringify this by doing json.stringify. So json.stringify goose list. It turns the goose list, which is an array of objects, it turns that into a string. And the string is compatible with JSON syntax. So if you know anything about JSON, JavaScript object notation, it's basically, I mean, you have JSON in here. You have a package.json file. It's a way of storing structured data, and it looks like a JavaScript object, except it's all strings. So you can see each key and each value, or actually it's not all strings, but the actual, it needs to be compatible with the string. So we're using json.stringify to turn it into a JSON string. And now we can store this goose list string in our local storage like that. So that's just kind of a detail about how you store things in local storage. You have to store them as a JSON string if it's an object. Okay, now we should be able to view it, and I'll clear the data in here. So I think I can go right click, clear. And now I can see the value is not object anymore. It's an empty array. If I enter one, I'll enter Jan again. Now we're seeing the value is printed out as an object with a title of Jan, an ID of blah, blah, blah. So our to-do or our goose is now actually being saved properly as a string that represents an array of objects. And you can actually see it down here too. So anything in this database you can view in this view here, which is nice. Okay, so we saved our to-do list or our goose list in local storage. When we refresh the page though, it still disappears. So I'll show you that. I'll refresh the page and Jan goes away, even though it's still stored. Or wait, oh no, it's not still stored anymore. So why didn't it save? Because our goose list is starting out as an empty array. And then when the component loads, it runs this function and is storing our empty array goose list into our storage, into our database. So the database is getting refreshed with an empty array each time. So we want to change that. We want the default of it to actually come from if we have existing entries in our local storage database, we want the default goose list to be set to whatever is in local storage already. So does that make sense? When we load our app, if there's existing to-dos or geese in our local storage database, we want to set the default value of goose list to those. Otherwise, if we do this, if we keep it the way it was, where it's set to an empty array, we set the goose list to an empty array, and then we delete all of the geese that were in our database before and replace it with this empty array. So we want to populate our goose list with any existing entries in our local database, our local storage. So we're going to update the default state of the to-do list or the goose list to read our saved to-do list item from local storage. And we can use localStorage.get item. So here we have localStorage.set item, which is adding a new entry to our local storage database. We can use another one. I'm going to just do it up here. localStorage.get item. So set item and get item. Get item gets our saved goose list if we pass it in like that. And then we can store it in the variable const existing geese equals localStorage.get item. And now we would expect existing geese when our app reloads, existing geese will be any geese that were already in our local storage from before. So I am going to set that like that. So our default value of goose list is now pulled from our local storage database. And then when we change the goose list, when we add new geese, it always is going to sync back up to the database in our useEffect here. So here this is kind of the two steps to sync our goose list with a local database in our browser. So now if I try it, I think it should work. Oh, no, errors. Goose list.map is not a function. What am I doing wrong here?
Well, you're using
Oh,
stringify, but then you also
yeah.
have to use the other method to convert it back into an array.
Yep, exactly. Good catch. That's exactly the problem there. We're turning the goose list array into a string to store it in the database. But now when we retrieve it from the database, we need to turn it back into an array. So basically existing geese here, this variable here is not, see, it's a string. You can see it there. It's either a string or null. We want it to be an actual array. So instead of JSON.stringify to turn it into a string, we're going to use JSON.parse. And we're going to wrap that whole thing in JSON.parse. So we're going to retrieve the goose list. We're going to use JSON.parse, which parses JSON. It parses a string of JSON and turns it into a JavaScript object. So I can hover over it, converts a JavaScript object notation string, a JSON string, into an object. So now here we're converting a JavaScript object or value into JSON. And then when we retrieve it, we convert it from a string into normal JavaScript object. So now try this, hello, and then I can reload and hello stays there. So now I can add a bunch of geese to my list. I can reload the page. In fact, I could even close out of my whole browser. And then I can reopen a new browser window. Let's see. New window. Go to that app URL. Oh. Something went wrong. Let's look in my, okay. So I guess it's possible that deleting, oh, it's probably because I'm in an incognito tab. I do all my development in an incognito tab because it makes sure your extensions, your browser extensions don't run, which might cause confusion. Okay, we're not getting anything. How about I'll set this to that. Not sure what's going wrong. Okay, so existing geese. Oh, it's going to be the saved goose list or null. If it's null, then this is going to be null. And we're setting the goose list to null instead of an empty array. So how about this is something that you probably won't run into unless you like reload your tab. But I'm going to try this. I'm going to try doing for an empty array. This is called the nullish coalescing operator. Don't worry about it. Yep, that fixes it. So basically the problem I was having is the array was starting out or we're expecting an empty array for existing geese, but we were receiving null. And so if I receive null, this putting these two question marks here and then the array says, if this first thing is null, then set the value to the second thing. So it's called the nullish coalescing operator. You might not need it unless you run into that, which I ran into something from reloading my browser. So that fixes it. Okay. So yeah, we should be able to reload our page and our to-dos are saved in storage. So I can reload and they're saved. Okay, so now that was using useEffect to sync our state to an external. So useEffect, here's our logic for syncing our goose list to local storage. And then here's our logic for retrieving the geese from the database, the local storage database. And now we're going to pull this logic into a custom hook because it's getting a little bit confusing. And looks like I have a question, Anton.
Yep. My question is, why do we need useEffect here? If we are retrieving something from local storage out of useEffect, why can't we set something into local storage without useEffect?
We could have it so that every time we add a goose, we add the new goose list to local storage. We need basically we need some logic that says whenever the goose list changes, we want to sync with some external system. So the goose list changes and it triggers this function. It saves our updated goose list to the local storage. That's what we're using useEffect here for, is saying whenever this goose list changes, we're gonna sync it up with our external database, which that's a convenient, easy pattern.
So it's the only reason for us to do that with useEffect is just that
What we're really
a key
doing is we're
event that
preparing to
we
be
are
using asynchronous
reacting
code.
on. Yep. Hmm?
What we're really doing is preparing to use asynchronous code in the future. So when we're
Ah,
using asynchronous code, you can't use asynchronous code in a normal React hook normally. The only way you can use it is in a useEffect. And so we're
ah.
simulating connecting to like a more official database, which like, I mean, local storage is an official database, but it's only on your
Okay, yeah,
computer.
now it makes sense. Now,
Yeah.
like with a sync in mind, now it makes sense. Thanks.
So when we are connecting to a database over the network, over like the internet, um, our code needs to be asynchronous. And the only time we can have asynchronous code in a React component is in a useEffect. And so this is local storage is synchronous because it's just on your computer, but interacting with any other database, you're generally going to have asynchronous code. So this logic could be done here without using a useEffect, but we're preparing for the kind of pattern of using external databases in React. Good question. If you want to see what it would look like to just do it without a useEffect, I could delete the useEffect and I could just have it whenever we add a goose. I can set the goose list to this value. And then I can also do local storage dot set item to that. Oh, we need to retrieve the previous goose list from, but I can actually just do new, or I can do the existing goose list. This should do the exact same thing. I'll try it out. I'm reloading. It's fine. I can add new geese and reload. Oh, okay. That didn't work. That probably has to do with the goose list being the outdated version of it, I think. I'm not sure. I'm going on a detour anyways. Use useEffect here because you're preparing for using it with asynchronous code and stuff. Okay, so the last step is pulling out some of this complex logic because our app component is getting a little crowded, a lot of stuff going on here. So we're going to pull it out into a custom hook. So in our app.jsx, oh yeah, I have another question, Natalie.
Wondering, so like on my code, I have the OR operator on that place where you have the covalescence, the nullish covalescence operator, or the two question marks. And it seems to work, but is there an advantage to using the nullish covalescence operator instead of the OR operator?
Yeah, good question. Nullish coalescing operator. It's similar to logical OR. Let's see. The nullish coalescing operator is a logical operator that returns its right-hand side operand when its left-hand side operand is null or undefined, and otherwise returns the left-hand side. So it returns what's on the left, unless what's on the left is null or undefined, then it returns what's on the right. There's another way of doing it, which is, well, there's something like that. That won't work because it will always return what's on the left. You could use and. Or wait. No, you're right. You're right. You're right. It would be or because we evaluate this. And then if this is truthy, then you don't need to evaluate this. If it's not truthy, then you do need to evaluate that. I think that would do the same thing.
Oh, okay, so it doesn't really matter.
Let's see. JS logical OR. The logical OR operator for a set of operands is true if and only if one or more of its operands is true. It's typically used with Boolean logic. It returns a Boolean value. However, it actually returns the value of the one specified. There's a way to use it. Yeah, short circuit evaluation. That's what we're talking about. So there's a way to basically say, I want to evaluate some code only if one expression is true. The logical expression is evaluated left to right. It is tested for possible short circuit evaluation using the following rule. Some truthy expression or expression, it's short circuit evaluated to the truthy expression. So if the left side is true, then it returns the left side. If the left side is false, then it returns the right side.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure there's some difference. I can't explain it really right here, right now. It's beyond the scope of this lecture. But yeah, if you want, you can use nullish coalescing. And for just everyone who's like confused by these things, these are deeper JavaScript things that are just like, it's a little tiny thing that you'll see every once in a while. Oh. Were you saying something? I think my internet cut out for a second.
I was just saying, thank you. That really helps.
Oh, I'm glad. Yeah. So these are little JavaScript things that you'll see here and there that might confuse you, but don't worry about it. You can take it out. Doesn't need it. Okay, where were we? Okay, so we're going to use a custom hook. So in the app.jsx, we're going to create a new function named use semi-persistent state, which will be a custom hook. Semi-persistent state. That's a long name for a function, but let's go for it. Use semi-persistent state. And it's a function, so I'm going to make the function body. Nothing in it yet, but this is our new custom hook. We're going to copy and paste, or we're going to cut the use state and use effect hooks from app into semi-permanent state. So we're just going to copy all this stuff here, not add goose, not add to do, just the stuff that has the local storage, the use state, and the use effect. Anything that has to do with, yeah, these things here. We're going to copy and paste into there. And then we're going to return an array with our goose list and set goose list. So now this hook is a function that gets our existing geese from the local storage, stores it in state, React state. We get our goose list and set goose list state. We return those so that they can be used in our app component. And then in the middle here, we're syncing it with we're using a useEffect to sync it with the local storage so that anytime the goose list changes, our local storage gets updated with the current goose list. And then in our app component, I'm going to use this function. I'm going to call this hook here, this use semi-persistent state. I'm going to call it, and it's going to return an array with these two things in it, right? So I'm going to say const, for now, I'll just say thing equals use semi-persistent state. So what is thing? Well, it's going to be an array with our goose list and set goose list. So if I want to actually get those values out, I could say const goose list equals thing at 0, right? Thing is going to be this array. The first element of the array is our goose list. So I'm getting our thing. And then I'm getting the first index of our thing, and that's the goose list. I could do that for set goose list too. Set goose list will be thing at 1. So remember, thing is going to be an array with 2 items. One of them is goose list. The next one is set goose list. This is one way we could do it, but does anyone know an easier way of getting goose list and set goose list out of?
Destruction.
Yep. So I can instead say, well, thing is an array with goose list and set goose list. So I'm going to destructure out goose list and set goose list. And that's just how destructuring works. That's why use state returns those 2 things in the way that it does. So now we're in our app component, we're using this custom hook we made. The custom hook is in charge of creating and managing this goose list state and syncing it to our local storage database. In our app, all we need is to just use the goose list and set the goose list to a different value when we add a goose. This hook will be in charge of creating the goose list originally and updating the local storage to sync up with the goose list. So now in our app component, we have a simplified logic where we don't need to worry about any of this database local storage stuff. And I'll just check in my browser, make sure it's still working. Yep. Okay. We're almost done. One last step. Yeah, one last step is using JavaScript fragments or JSX fragments. But I'm already using them. Sorry, I introduced these on one of my first lectures. I figured, I mean, this was one of the first things I learned in React is using fragments. But if you haven't seen them yet, that's what these are. It's basically in React, like you might have like divs here. In React, if you try to return multiple things, multiple components at the same base level in your component, like multiple JSX tags, it'll complain. It'll say JSX expressions must have 1 parent element. And what that means is we need to, in any component, the component needs to return 1 kind of base element. It can return as many nested elements as you want, but it has to have 1 component that's like, or 1 like JSX element that's at the base level that all the other ones are nested in. And that has to do with functions in React. These are functions after all. Each component is a function, and a function can only return 1 thing. It can only return 1 parent thing of JSX with other elements inside. If you try to return multiple things, like if I duplicated that or something, we have 2 parent divs, that won't work. So a fragment is a way of avoiding having, it's a way of getting around that. You can return a fragment that has multiple things, and it basically will say, the fragment doesn't appear in your actual HTML. It's ignored. So it's a way of returning multiple elements without adding an additional one that clutters up your HTML. Okay, that's it. That's the end. Any thoughts, feelings, questions, anything you want clarified? How's everyone feeling?
Thanks a lot. As usual, super understandable and helpful. Thanks.
I'm glad.
So would it make any difference if the function use semi-persistent state was inside of the app function instead of outside of it?
Yeah, so when you're defining a custom hook, this is a custom hook, you can't have it inside a component. And the reason is because when you're using hooks, like useState and useEffect and stuff, they need to be at the base level of your component, not inside like a function in your component. So if I were to try to create some state inside this function right here, add goose, if I were to try to do like const thing set thing equals use state, hello, you get an error that says React hook use state is called in a function. Add goose. That is neither a React function component nor a custom React hook function. React component names must start with an uppercase letter. React hook names must start with the word use. So this is just some explanation about when you're using use state or use effect, they have to be at the base level of a component or the base level of a custom hook. In fact, you couldn't even do it inside an if statement. If we wanted an if statement that was like, if true, or wait, why is that? I don't know why that's. Am I forgetting how if statements work? Does anyone want to explain to me how to make an if statement? Because I'm apparently I
It
forgot.
seems correct as far as JavaScript goes. I don't know if it's somehow different in React.
Oh, this is okay. This is
Can
an
you repeat,
ESLint
please?
thing.
What do you want to do?
Okay, I'm just gonna do if 1 + 1. Oh, okay. So this is valid React or valid JavaScript. It's ESLint. So it's not an actual JavaScript error. It's a style guide. It's saying this is bad style. It's not actually an error though. So I'm just gonna say let thing equals true. This will probably fix it. Thing. Okay, so I have an if statement. I'm going on a tangent here, but trying to make a point that if we were to do const blah set blah equals use state blah, again, it'll say React hook use state is called conditionally. React hooks must be called in the exact same order in every component render. So there's some strict guidelines of where you can use React hooks, like use state and use effect. You can't use them in an if statement. You can't use them in a function. You can't use them in a loop. There are specific places that you can use them. And it pretty much just comes down to you can only use them on the base level of your components or the base level of a custom hook. So we couldn't move this custom hook here, copying and pasting it in here. Oh, wait, it's not giving us any errors. It's probably going to cause problems. It's not giving us any actual errors, which I'm surprised about, but I'm sure it would cause problems. So yeah, your hooks,
So I
your
guess
custom
sometimes
hooks should go outside.
ESLint doesn't give you errors, but then as soon as you compile it or save your file, then you get errors on the terminal or on the console, like in your actual React file.
Yep. Yeah, and another note on that is like with a custom hook, one of the things that you'll want to do. Wait, am I still sharing? I am, right?
Yeah.
Okay. One of the things that you'll want to do eventually is I'm going to take this hook and I'm going to put it in its own file. I'm going to do a new file called use semi-persistent state.js. I'm going to take that hook. I'm going to put it in its own file. I'm going to re-import useEffect and useState into this file. And then I'm going to export this function. And now I can import it in here. So I have import our function use semi-persistent state from this file here. So now I have a separate file and a custom hook inside a separate file. So our app component or our file with our app component no longer has that custom hook in it. The custom hook is in its own file. And that is like a pattern that you'll see often. And one of the nice things about it is if I want our goose list and set goose list, if I want these in any other component, I can just import it from that file. I don't need to pass it as props. So like our goose list here, we're receiving it as props. I could delete that, have that like that. And now I'm retrieving the goose list in our goose list component, not from props this time, but from our custom hook. So a React component can receive props for the state that it uses, or it can get the state from a custom hook. And so the custom hook is a way of sharing state between different components instead of having to pass it through props. It's a different type of pattern. You'll see each one used in a different way. Like for example, our goose list items here, we're mapping through the goose list and creating a bunch of goose list items, and each one is getting passed in an ID and a title of a goose. So we have an array of geese. Each goose is, we're making a new component out of each goose, a new goose list item out of each goose. And so this ID, this goose ID and goose title is going to be different for each element in this map. And this goose list item component needs to get these values from props, because if we just tried to get it from here, the goose list from a hook, the goose list item wouldn't know which goose it's supposed to be. I'm doing a terrible job of explaining that. I'm sorry. Ignore what I just said. Just know that you can use custom hooks in their own file and then import the state into any React component you want. That's one of the good uses of them.
That's a very neat way of replacing props in some places.
Yep. And you'll find even more ways in the future. There's something called use context, which is another React hook that will allow you to share state between different components. And then you'll get to use reducer, which is another way of storing state. And then you'll get to Redux. And when you get to Redux, it's like really confusing. And you'll hate your life because it's really hard. But you'll get it eventually. I don't think we're going to be using Redux in this course because it's a whole thing. Anyways. Okay. Any final thoughts before I wrap it up here?
So is Redux actually part of React? I thought it was a completely different library.
Yeah, Redux is its own separate library. It was originally made for React, I'm pretty sure, and it's most commonly used with React. And I think there's even specific like versions of it that go with React. So technically Redux is separate from React, but it's very commonly used with React.
Okay, okay, that's cool.
Yeah. All right. Probably gonna wrap up. Thanks everyone. I hope you learned stuff. I definitely did. I'll probably have to do some more looking into, let's see. I had some questions that I couldn't answer, so I'll look into those. And yeah, I'll post the slides and the recording, and I'll put the code up on Code Sandbox so everyone can see it, and then I'll make a post in the Slack channel, Hawk announcements, like I always do.
All right.
So yeah, be on the lookout for those things, and yeah, I'll see you guys next week.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
See you then.
Thanks a
Bye,
lot.
y'all.
Bye bye.
Bye, you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.